Well, good to have you here with me today, Ken. Again, we are Parux, a digital product studio, and our mantra is pretty simple: cool projects with cool people. And we're basically here to share some insights on some valuable topics, just to provide insights based on experience, based on what we've lived. Ken and I have been managing digital projects for a very long time. So excited for the topic at hand today. Ken, why don't you introduce a little bit more detail?
Thank you, Cesar. I'm Ken Mocabee. I'm senior partner here at Parux, and today we're going to talk about prototyping. And but first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we're here and what drives us. So, according to the Harvard Business Review, 95% of all new products fail, and that's really stunning odds. And it's not by chance. The 5% that do well do things that the other 95% do not. And that's really our passion. It's not to lean into the failure, but really to lean into the success. And we call that the Five Club. And it's all about helping ventures and product teams become successful across an entire spectrum of success measures, including user experience, feasibility, usability, desirability, viability. All of these things are really critical if you're going to have successful product. And we want to build products that have lasting impact and are adoptable and have a good business case. So that's why we're here.
Good point in that we also try to build a culture around everything you said, right? From the second that we're thinking about hiring someone to how we manage operations, procedures, it's all about that value, and it's all about trying to be a part of that five club. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ken.
So let's talk a little bit about the value of prototyping, Cesar. It's something that comes up all the time. We talk to our clients and other product teams, and a lot of companies, a lot of ventures want to skip prototyping for a variety of reasons. It takes too much time. It's too costly. And let's talk a little bit about what the value of prototyping is and what the risks are of skipping it.
Yeah, at the risk of not being clear, I think we're talking about pain points right now, right? What are the pain points of thinking about not prototyping? And it starts with the urge to not want to do it. We get a lot of awesome clients that come to us, and they're just so excited. They have this enthusiasm. They're ready to get their, roll up their sleeves and just let's just start. Let's just get going. Let's build this thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. You need that excitement. You need that energy. But what we like to say is time out. Just we'll slow down a little bit and let's have some time to fall in love with the problem to make sure that any energy that we spend, we get the most out of it. So by trying to bypass any kind of prototyping, you're losing just so much in that critical step of cutting corners. So I want to talk about a little bit of that pain, but it starts with wanting to skip it altogether, right? Another pain point that we see is that's great. You've decided that you want a prototype, but the prototype that you want to build is just so big, so bulky.
Mhm.
And it's like you're trying to recreate the entire experience. And again, one of the main reasons we choose prototyping is to learn, to get more education, to get deeper into solving the root problem and starting some of that validation, right? So chunking prototypes into segments and pieces that are manageable is another thing that we see with a pain point. Don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's nice about is creating those smaller pieces, the chunks, like you said, is that it allows you to really present that to users and allow them to focus on the one thing that you want them to focus on. If you do too much, they can be all over the place, and you don't necessarily get the feedback that you're looking for. But by really keeping it into smaller pieces, it allows you to do that iteration much more quickly and validate that you're on the right track with that particular workflow or that particular user experience that you want to highlight.
You said the word validate, so have I. So that's a consistent theme. So let's get to the next point, pain point, and that is people that go through prototyping process, but never share that prototype with end users to validate and get that feedback loop that we talk about. That's a huge miss. Like, why would you go through all the trouble of prototyping? I get it, right? Your internal production teams can all communicate and collaborate. Your stakeholders can have a say, but not sharing that with customers is a critical miss, and we've kind of seen that through horror stories, before clients come to us and whatnot. So we just got to make sure that, yes, if you get the prototype going, great, but make sure you leverage that with real users. It is such a pivotal, part of the equation there. The other thing that we talk about is when you design prototypes, don't try to make them too high res. The more raw you get into it, the more wireframed it is. It's an early experience. Studies show that the feedback that you get can be more transparent, because sometimes the UI, if it's really great, it can mask a lot of user experience issues. It can look like a finished product when it's not, and you're just trying to validate and get as much information as you can. At the same time, if you're doing high res fidelity prototyping, it's also taking you a lot longer. It's costing you more to make the changes. And what we want is quick iterative feedback and manageable chunks. So speed is of the equation, but getting that quality feedback is another part of that. So it's not just doing the prototype, it's what you do with it really that can create some deep value for you. Um,
Absolutely. And I think, too many times product teams use prototyping is really just to kind of create the user interface, and it's just something that they feed to their development team. And of course, that does have value. There's nothing wrong with creating interfaces and setting that all up. But if you're bypassing the users and not including them in that process, you're establishing that number one, care about what they think, and number two is you're introducing enormous risk on the product's journey altogether. And that's something that we've seen over and over and over again. This is a key point, an inflection point in your journey, in your product journey. You say, okay, we think we've understand the problems that we're trying to solve. We've ideated against those and we've come up with solutions. And we've maybe even done some additional customer feedback on what those ideas are. And you're getting positive feedback that you're on the right track. If you're not doing the final step, which is to validate that with the prototyping process, then you've really let yourself down and your customers down.
This is an interesting conversation that you and I have had, with a lot of clients that we're talking to, a lot of products, I'm sorry, not products, but prospects that we're talking to. And everyone just intuitively thinks of prototyping as production value centric, meaning we're going to build this prototype and this is what the production team has to offer, and these are the positives that align itself with the production itself. But there are non-production values to prototyping. So the production values would be, well, we have a visual, we can document and annotate against those visuals, we have a workflow process. This is where you might be able to show a visual prototype to, let's say, some developers, and then when they are tasked with estimating what's it going to cost to build this and kind of test this and create the right architecture, they can do a better job with the estimates. Again, these are all product centric things that fit into the production. But the things that you're talking about, the validation, the getting feedback from customers, the strategizing with the stakeholders, thinking about what sub-market we're going to introduce this product into once we build it, and the triage of what features we put into this versus what features we leave out for MVP. All those things are critical aspects that you learn from prototypes, and notice that they're not necessarily production centric. So it's one of those, like, 1 + 1 is not 2 when it comes to prototyping. All these individual parts add up to a greater as a whole. And I think that's the insight that we try to communicate to all these parties that try to bypass this, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think one of the themes that we talk about all the time, and we're going to be talking about as we go through our series of webinars, is iteration and the value of that. So prototyping is not just one step along the journey. It is an activity that you are doing throughout. And so as you're getting that customer feedback on the problem you're trying to solve, and then as you're trying to develop solutions for that, by using those prototypes to echo that back to your customers and get their feedback and make sure that you really are on the right track is absolutely critical and just enormously important and valuable. So, that iterative process is something that never ends. And, I think it's very often, like I said, the prototyping is just sort of one step along the way, and it's really not. It should be an integral part of your entire product journey ongoing.
Now that we talked about some pain points, why don't we share some stories and just some practical experience, Ken? I mean, we have dealt with this for many, many years, but let's give a couple examples just to share some of those insights for those people that are flying the wall, kind of listening in as to prototyping.
Absolutely. I think one story that I wanted to share was, we've got a client that had been working very hard on sort of pivoting from a consultative model to a product model. They'd grown very rapidly. They were scaling up, and but they realized that really to increase their chances of being of growing successfully and scaling properly, that they had to develop their own platform. And that was, they hired a development team, and very competent team, very technically skilled. And the problem was that they were building products, they were launching them and exposing them to their customers, and they weren't being received as well as they wanted them to be. They were just the workflows weren't right, the user experience wasn't as good as it should have been. They were just really struggling with it. And I think that's a very common problem with development teams, is that it's just not a skill set that every development team necessarily has. If you're talking about a technical kind of team, good competent developers are obviously critical to the process, but if they don't have experience with UX and really pinpointing what the workflows need to be and how to do those things in the right way, then you can wind up building products that just don't quite hit the mark. And that's what they were struggling with. And so when they brought us in, that's what we were able to do. We were able to stabilize that and create structure around that process and give them really, really clear and concise and meaningful user experiences that looked great, but also more importantly had the great workflows around them, and there were all the notifications and all of the pieces that had to go into that workflow were handled the right way, and it improved their product dramatically.
Yeah, ultimately, just having something that's functional when it comes to digital experiences is not enough anymore. I think one important call out is we all have phones. These phones are super smart. They have all these apps, and some of these apps are completely free, but they've cost millions and millions and millions, sometimes even billions of dollars to develop. So they have the best of breed when it comes to usability. They have the best of breed as far as, everything just should just feel like this. Everything should just be as intuitive as this app that I'm using. Why isn't this business and their application feel as easy as this? It's almost like a commodity, right? But we all know that not every company has those resources. Not every company is a technology company that is product centric. So you really have to work hard at delivering intuitive solutions, right? So it's not just about functionality, like follow these steps and you get the results. You got to find the right solution within the right context with the right usability for the right people to get that positive experience. So, it's just understated, but it is something that everyone battles with. Another story that I think of is we actually did a pretty cool project inside of healthcare. And this was for medical practices trying to do some triage quickly for all their patients. But just the amount of data that we had to put on the screen for them to make these tough decisions, the amount of functions and subfunctions and just everything on the screen. It's like when you put all the pieces on there, the interface felt so overwhelming, right? It was functional to your point with the previous story, but it just doesn't feel like, man, there's got to be a better way. And through iteration, we designed that screen several times, but it wasn't just from a designer's perspective. It wasn't just from a developer's perspective. We got those clinicians and healthcare professionals to tell us, this is why I need this piece of data. So please don't eliminate it. But here's the order by which I read all the data. So we can have primary, secondary, tertiary, gray things out, make things smaller so that they kind of disappear. And we were left with absolutely what was necessary in the right order. So even though we had a lot of stuff on the screen still, because that was a requirement, it just looks so much easier instead of just dumping everything on the screen. we never would have arrived at that conclusion if it was just designers passing that on to the developers and then passing that on to the user going, here's what you said. We just took your orders and we're done. It took everyone working together, collaborating, no one in silos, doing it together. And that's what these prototypes are all about. And once we did that iteration, the future of the product got better and better and better. So that's just another case point of how we like to highlight. It takes a team, takes a village to make this happen. And you got to do it in the right order and in the right way.
Yeah, and can you imagine trying to do that with code? With trying to build an MVP and do that, create that user experience. It would have been either impossible or extraordinarily slow, but also really, really expensive. And it probably would have been shortcutted at some point. But by having it done through prototyping, you could just go over. And I know how many versions did we do of that? Probably, 15 versions to get it right. And once it was right, it was like, aha, it was just great.
And it wasn't like we were redesigning an entire interface, right? Again, we talk
Hmm.
about breaking it down. So once we had a certain segment, that kind of stayed and that was sticky, right? And then we just iterated other smaller pieces as we went through it. So yeah, it was a variety of iterations, but every time we got different perspectives, we reviewed those perspectives, and then we tweaked. So it was just a great collaboration. I wish all projects were like that, but that's a human highlight that we can share, that a lot of collective smart people were working together to bring that interface, to where it's at today. So pretty exciting. So obviously we talked about pain. We shared some live experiences, but let's get into some of the benefits here
Sure.
of what prototyping has, and one of the blogs that we put together. I'll just call the principles or topics, right? Topic number one is visualization and concept validation, right? So let's talk about visualization. I love the little anecdote that everyone hears, right? A picture can be worth 1,000 words. Well, imagine what an interactive prototype can do. It really is a visual tool that everyone can look at. And it's kind of like an equality of documentation, because if you're reading, that can mean something to you as you're reading that content. But when you have a visual in a flow and it's interactive, so you can step through it, it kind of brings a sense of balance of, it doesn't matter how technical you are. It doesn't matter what discipline you come from. Everyone can raise their hand. Everyone can circle us. See that right there? That's the bottleneck. Everything before that and after that is good. How do we fix that? Oh my God, the amount of collaboration that you can have through just a clear visual and a clear workflow is amazing, right? Not only that, it helps with validation because everyone can raise their hand. Everyone can go, when we talk to the users, they all felt that this was intuitively better than that other solution out there. So it's not just the visualization and the nomenclature and the language that's used to describe what we're trying to resolve here. It's also we're validating and getting better solutions every time that we iterate. So that's just a very important clause there that we throw in. Any take on that, or any added notes to that?
Yeah, I think the one of the other key pieces of that that's really important from a production standpoint is that if you're just having a list of the functions and features, you want to call them acceptance criteria or whatever, that's great. I mean, those are important things to have, and the development team can use those to make sure that they've done all the things that are required for that particular flow or that screen or whatever. But there's nothing like seeing it for really making that crystal clear exactly what the user experience is supposed to be, and takes a lot of the guesswork out. So when you're doing things and you're going from, like you said, from text or just a narrative, it just really doesn't have the same kind of interactive capabilities as having that design that they can refer to and use. It really streamlines the development process.
Yeah, those are really good points. Kind of second benefit that we called out is iterative design and feedback loops.
It's
Um,
huge.
Pretty obvious, right? But let's break those down and have some key takeaways. So iterative design. Remember when we talked about, you don't want to create this huge model. You want to break it down into chunks because you want to focus. You want to make sure that that particular segment is really good. Anything leading up to it and anything that comes afterwards, you're trying to stitch all these little experiences and workflows together so that the entire experience is intuitive. And guess what? That does not come from intuition. That comes from needs analysis. That comes from real data. And that's where the feedback loops come in, right? You can go into something with a lot of intuition. There's nothing wrong with that. Validating is the key. And you can't validate unless you have repetitive feedback loops with the general population and real users. So those two things working together are such critical aspects. I know we've talked about this particular one with everything else that we were talking about before, but that's just one that if you do prototyping and you miss the breaking it down into chunks and not getting iterative feedback loops, you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is such a critical piece of the puzzle if and when you're developing a product. And it's scary when you see product teams just skip that piece, and it just introduces an enormous amount of risk. Speaking of risk, so let's talk a little bit about risk mitigation and reducing costs, keep those under control. How does the prototyping process tie into that, and what's the value there?
I like to break it down into like a macro level factor and then a micro level factor. Let's talk about the macro level overall, right? Um, if you don't have needs analysis, if you haven't validated your product, doesn't matter how clean the interface is, doesn't matter how intuitive you think it is. If you just drop it on customers and they don't agree, it's too late to fix it at the end when you've launched. So if you wait that long to validate, chances are, number one, you're going against the Five Club because that's not what the Five Club does. But number two, fixing it and pivoting at that point, it's going to cost you so much more time and energy than if you just would have done that in the beginning. So I think that's the macro level factor, right?
Mhm.
The micro level factors are more production centric, like we were talking about before. It's hey, we're not trying to fix everything. We're taking baby steps and we're doing this in low fidelity. So the speed by which you can actually go through iteration is faster. The adjustments that you're doing per all that iteration is faster. And once you start to figure it out, now you're taking bigger brush strokes when it comes to the final UI, the final deliverables, and the final performance of said platform that you're building. So you start with the hardest part first, and hopefully by the time you're launching, it's minor tweaks and minor things because the validation happened in the beginning. So those are the minor factors that I think those all add up to time and money. And a good transition point is the fact that, let's talk about collaboration. We
Mm.
are talking about the enhanced collaboration and communication. If you are leveraging prototypes over time, the quality of conversations and the amount of conversations that you're having, they're not in silos, they're with all teams. So the more conversations you have across all teams, now you're talking about dynamic collaboration, and that can speed up production. It doesn't slow it down. And not only does it speed it up, but it introduces quality, which is awesome, right?
Exactly.
So those are all forms and functions of it. And then the last one that we love to talk about is if you follow everything that we just talked about, essentially what you're doing is you are a user-centric company. You're basically putting your end customer as the center pillar, and every decision you make around in your platform is based on that user. So now you all have forced empathy on everything that you do, which is kind of what we talk about, right? Like we're not designing this for fun. We're designing this to impact someone's life. And if we want the most impact and we want that impact to scale and provide value to many, many users, you better have empathy for those users from the very beginning. Don't wait to the end to figure that out. So all these benefits just add up to a lot. So it's just an exciting topic. A lot of people think prototyping is boring and whatever, but I love it. I absolutely love it. So I just wanted to thank your time. Maybe you can put us through the conclusion here, but I appreciate your time today, Ken, and hopefully our audience out there actually learned something more than just surface level topics when it comes to prototyping.
Oh, no, that's great stuff, Cesar. So, one last thing I wanted to talk about is tell one more story is that, I do a lot of pitch deck judging, and I was judging this organization that had presented one of the grant organizations that I judge for, and we had a really heart-to-heart talk. We had a good conversation, and they were struggling because they developed this product for accountants that was going to streamline reporting and give them really nice metrics. And they were getting really, really poor adoption, like almost nobody. A few people would try it, but nobody adopted it. And what it came down to when they realized what the problem was, it was that accountants love Excel, and moving them out of Excel was a monumental task. It was almost impossible, and that proved to be the blocker that kept them from being successful. And had they done prototyping, had they done that step, they wouldn't have built the product. And which I know that sounds like maybe a failure, but I actually consider that as a win, because when somebody goes through the process, they do the customer discovery, they identify the problem, and then they validate it with prototyping and maybe a simple MVP. You get that feedback that may tell you this is not a viable product. We cannot get to business viability, and that is actually a win. And then whenever companies and ventures go through that process, and they do wind up abandoning a product for the right reasons, because they know that they're not going to get traction when they launch it, that's actually a huge win, and saves them a ton of time and money, and allows them to focus on things that actually might be viable. So that no go decision is a vital part of the prototyping, and it's just something that can't be neglected.
No, that's awesome. That's a great way to end it. So maybe just as a little recap, right? Prototyping is something that the Five Club does. So if you're not doing it, we think it's a critical mistake. You got to follow that as a general principle. Um, there's so many factors and benefits to doing it, and they're not just production centric. That's another huge takeaway from this. So if your inclination is to skip it, fight that inclination. For all the people out there that are considering getting into this world, they're actually building and designing a product, but they're not prototyping. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, you want some additional insights, feel free to reach out to either Ken or myself. We would love to support you. We'd love to help you. Again, this whole webinar series is just about insights and value. We're just trying to provide value content out there, and looking forward to a whole bunch of topics to come in the future. Excited about that. And we'll leave some more for the next time.
Cesar, thank you very much. This was really a fun conversation, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Awesome.